Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us on this special edition of Talking Points. I'm Luke Radel.
And I'm Jake Morel. It's been less than a week since the election, and the transition process is already underway. President Biden has invited President-elect Trump to the White House for the customary meeting in the Oval Office.
And Jake, customary even though 2020, President Trump refused to meet with Biden or attend his inauguration. So the last time this meeting happened, you're seeing it, 8 years ago after Trump won the 2016 race, a big surprise. He met with then-President Barack Obama in the Oval Office. The meeting between Trump and Biden, coming up this Wednesday, will be the first extended conversation between the two men since that debate back in June that we talked about a little earlier on CNN that ended President Biden's political career. Biden had this to say in the Rose Garden last week about the election outcome.
I know for some people, it's a time for victory, to state the obvious. For others, it's a time of loss. Campaigns are contests of competing visions. The country chooses one or the other. We accept the choice the country made. I've said many times, you can't love your country only when you win.
The White House has said that Biden will attend Trump's inauguration in January, in a moment that will make history for sure. So, who better to bring in for this discussion than some experts? Welcome to the show. Margaret Susan Thompson is an associate professor in the history department at the Maxwell School, teaching many classes, including on the modern American presidency. Pretty perfect for right now.
Indeed, and Rick Trunfio is an adjunct professor at the law school and a former assistant district attorney here in Onondaga County. He also served as an officer in the U.S. Navy JAG Corps. So on this Veterans Day and every day, we thank you for your service, sir. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. Let's begin first with Professor Thompson. What is your reaction to the history that is made by
Well,
this
it
Trump
certainly was historic. We've only had one president serve two unconnected terms.
Yeah.
That was Grover Cleveland, another New Yorker. And so we're going to be facing that again.
Yeah, it should be really interesting to see how that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And what did you see in this election that surprised you results-wise?
Well, I think your opening remarks really captured a lot of it, that people didn't feel the economic success that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were trying to argue about during their campaign. They also felt dissatisfied. They felt forgotten. They felt, in many cases, overlooked by the Democrats, and that's something the Democratic Party is going to have to deal with over the next 2 years for the midterms and 4 years for the general.
They're also willing to overlook some of the former president's personal flaws, including the fact that he will be the first convicted felon ever sworn in as president. Professor Trunfio, do you expect we'll be seeing his sentencing or any of his other trials moving forward after this?
No, the Department of Justice has a policy that they don't prosecute presidents. Jack Smith's winding down the one prosecution he has left. Remember the national security one, the papers in Florida was dismissed. That appeal he'll withdraw that. Winding down the January 6th prosecution. The two remaining, there's three remaining. There's the Georgia one, which is on appeal.
Right.
We'll probably get a decision on that one relatively soon. The two in New York, one is the criminal conviction that you talked about. That is, the judge in that case is, he hasn't been sentenced yet, so it's not a conviction. I know it's a conviction. A conviction is not a conviction until the defendant's sentenced, because there's so many, a judge can set aside things before a sentence. In this particular case, the judge is now looking at a couple of issues. He's looking at the issue of immunity, and he's also looking at the issue of what was introduced at the trial.
Yeah.
What a lot of people, the same issues that overturned the Weinstein rape conviction are issues in the Trump case.
Yeah.
And then the civil matter that is also on appeal, I will tell you that the Attorney General's office did not get a very welcome response from the appellate division. They thought that civil fine was extraordinarily harsh.
Yeah.
They didn't think that there were some tough questions that the Attorney General's office had to ask. So I think that you'll probably see them all dissipate.
Well, just the practicality of trying to put a president of the United States in prison, or even having him pick up trash in the streets of Manhattan, like that doesn't seem practical.
And that's why the judge said that he was going to move the sentencing until after the election, because he wanted to make sure that he wasn't influencing the election. But I want to bring you back in here, Professor Thompson.
Yeah.
We've been watching Trump's cabinet picks come in. First for Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, his campaign co-chair, will become the first woman chief of staff, first female chief of staff, in White House history. What does that appointment mean for Trump's next term?
Well, that's very interesting. First of all, a chief of staff doesn't have to be approved by the Senate the way cabinet members do. So although they sit in the cabinet, they're not the same thing. And so all of those White House staffers can be appointed at the will of the president, dismissed at the will of the president. They don't have to be approved by anybody. Susie Wiles is an interesting choice. As you mentioned, she's the first woman, and that is, of course, historic. Just as in 2016, his campaign manager was the first woman to manage a successful presidential campaign. But here's the thing. She ran his campaign this time, obviously successfully, but it takes very different skills to win an election and then to govern. We don't know whether she's going to be able to make that transition. Most of her experience has either been in Congress, in the House of Representatives, or at the state level. She's had some experience, but she has no national governing experience, really. And she's going to be in the sit room a good bit of the time. We don't know what her foreign policy views are. She doesn't have experience, so it's going to be very interesting. Also, Donald Trump picked as his deputy chief of staff Stephen Miller, who I think is a controversial choice because he's so doctrinaire and he's so outspoken. As far as I know, he has little to no administrative skill, and that's really an administrative job. So it's going to be interesting to see how a self-described moderate Republican, that's how Susie Wiles described herself as recently as 2024, and somebody like Stephen Miller, who views himself as a real America First MAGA ideologue, are going to get along.
And a hardliner immigration, which we will be talking about a little later on in the program. Another high priority for Donald Trump is picking an attorney general. He wasn't so happy with Bill Barr or Jeff Sessions the last time around. What are you watching for in some of his next picks? I think we have an example of some of the list of names that he's looking for this time, like a Mike Lee out of Utah, Ken Paxton from Texas. What are you keeping an eye on?
I think Ken Paxton's a long shot. I think that I think of the front runners, John Ratcliffe, who's the former DNI in his administration. Matt Whitaker, he is a career justice guy. Mike Lee is a possibility. Schmidt dropped out today. Schmidt said he didn't want it. So
in Missouri,
right. So
one of the other options is Judge Eileen Cannon out of Florida, who, as you talked about, dismissed those documents case. Do you think that's a potential?
No, I don't think that's going to happen. No.
Just a little bit of wish casting, maybe.
I think that nobody really knows. I think that it's like when he was picking his vice president. Nobody really knows, and I think that. I actually don't know where Ken Paxton's name came from. I think that would be a disaster.
Yeah, it's possible that Cannon, maybe if not as AG, could end up on the Supreme Court, Jay.
Which is what I wanted to get into next. For both of you, obviously, Trump's last term in office, he appointed so many Supreme Court justices that then overturned Roe v. Wade, a few other controversial decisions. What does his second presidency look like with the Supreme Court to both of you? We'll start with you, Professor Thompson.
Well, I don't think Judge Cannon is a likely choice for the Supreme Court. I might see her on a district court. U.S. District Court. But I don't think she's ready for the Supreme Court. And I think there are a lot more qualified people who would fit Donald Trump's ideological criteria.
Everybody's assuming that somebody's going to leave the Supreme Court, right?
Thomas said he's not leaving until he's 101.
Yeah, he's going to be the longest serving justice. He's just got to make it to 2028.
Sotomayor said CNN today that she doesn't plan on leaving. I know that progressives have been trying to nudge her out. She's not going anywhere. She's 70. The oldest judge on the Supreme Court is Thomas. He's 76. Alito, 74. And the next oldest judge is Robertson. He's 69. So unless somebody dies or somebody retires, the Supreme Court composition isn't going to change.
Yeah, and quickly before we go, Professor Thompson, a lot of your fellow Democrats have been calling on Sonia Sotomayor to resign before the end of Biden's term. Are you one of those?
It's not going to happen.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
I don't think it's going to happen, but do you think it should happen?
No. I don't.
I agree with you,
I
Margaret.
think her health is not terrific, but there's no sign that her health won't allow her to serve for 4 more years. Interestingly, you pointed to the fact that he might not get any Supreme Court nominees or appointees.
Yes.
The last president who fits that category is Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter is now 100 years old himself.
Maybe they'll appoint him to the Supreme Court.
I
We'll have to see what happens.
He's
Professor
not a
Thompson.
lawyer. It's not a lawyer.
We'll see. We'll see what
You
happens.
know, one of the things I want to say is, everybody was pushing. Everybody, the Democratic Party was pushing to eliminate the filibuster and to pack the court. I'm pretty sure we're not going to hear that in the next 4 years.
Not anymore.
And you know, in your opening remarks, you talked about democracy worked. Well, that's what happens, right? When everybody that's in power thinks they're going to be in power forever. Sure. And I'm pretty sure that the Democratic Party now is never going to mention, at least in the next 4 years, packing the court or eliminating the filibuster. And they can really thank 2 centrists on the Democratic side, Sinema and Manchin, for that not being present right now.
Professor Thompson, Professor Trunfio, thank you both so much for being here. We really